Hello there, Final Fantasy TCG community. I'm Judge Jared, and I'm back this week with another installment of the Rules Roundup, which this is our fifth time doing this, but if it's your first time watching one of these, or you just don't remember, what's going on here is I'm going over rules questions that were asked in the unofficial global Discord server. So I'm here to answer those questions and get into the rules and everything behind what those answers are and how we get to those answers. And you're here to either test your rules knowledge and or hopefully, maybe learn a little something that you didn't know before you watch this video, if I'm lucky here. So anyway, not much to say other than that. Why don't we just hop right into the questions here? So first up, we've got Shara here, a card that maybe a bunch of you haven't seen. This is a little bit more niche of a card. So question here says, let's say, hypothetically, I have Shara and Sid Randell on the field, and the opponent targets Sid with a summon. If I activate Shara's special ability and make Sid immune to summons, does the summon break because it can't target Sid, or the opponent gets to choose another forward? Without getting too deep into her abilities, because we don't need to know all of them here, Shara has this ability that allows her to choose another category FFTA character and make it gain the ability that it can't be chosen by the opponent's summons or abilities until the end of the turn. And Sid Randell, all we need to know about him for this question is that he's another FFTA category FFTA forward. And so the question here is that if she does that ability on Sid Randell after he's been targeted by something, what happens with that summon? Does the summon, the way they phrase it is, does the summon break, or does it get to choose another forward? So what happens in this situation is that the summon basically it just self-cancels. There's a general rule you want to keep in mind for any effects on the stack, whether it's abilities or summons, which is that if they choose at least one target, and specifically the word choose at least one target, and then when they go to resolve all those targets that they chose, all of them are no longer valid, then the whole thing gets self-canceled. So in this scenario, they chose something with Sid, and then before it resolved, Sid became an invalid target. So when it resolves, there are no valid targets for the only thing that it chose. The whole thing gets canceled. So they do not get to choose another forward, and the summon doesn't break per se, but it self-cancels, and then after that, the summon moves from the stack to the break zone. All right, next question about Sherlotta here. How does this ability work? Does it use the stack or is it instant? Could I cast another card named Sherlotta if I use the put into break zone CP as a cost? This card is hilarious. If you weren't around in Opus 8 when this first was released, this card had notoriously, disgustingly bad game text. It was so bad, in fact, that they had to put out an errata before the set even came out, because that's just how wonky it was in terms of how they worded it and how unclear it was what the intention was. There's just something in the translation just did not work. So before we get into the way that it's worded now, because this is actually the errata wording, just for funsies, let's take a quick look at the original wording, which is here. The original wording is, if you pay a CP, you may put Sherlotta into the break zone to produce one CP of any element. And then in the reminder text here, actually it's not even reminder text, it's just parentheses. You can dull Sherlotta to pay the CP. Does that make sense to you? Does that wording make clear sense exactly how Sherlotta works and how she functions? Probably not. There's a lot of questions. I'm not going to dive into them here, but a lot of questions you can come up with just from looking at that original wording. So let's instead look at the errata wording here and the original question again. So she's been changed so that her text now says, you may put Sherlotta into the break zone to produce one CP of any element in order to pay a CP cost. And now our parentheses says that this can be in addition to doubling Sherlotta for CP. So the question, of course, is how does this work? Now this is a field ability, which means that it's always in effect. And the way it works essentially is that when you think about paying for things, paying for the cost of either a card or an ability, the way the rules are structured is that when we go to pay that cost, you have two options. Your choices are either to dull backups to produce CP, or to discard cards to produce CP, or some combination, right? But that's your two options. You're either dulling backups or you're discarding cards. Sherlotta is giving you this third option now. She's saying, in addition to either dulling backups or discarding cards, now you have the option that if you want to, when you're in the middle of paying, you can break her to produce a CP of any element. Okay? So now you have that third option that we don't normally have. They are also pointing out here in the parentheses that you can dull her at the same time to produce a CP. So the way that this works is that, let's say, actually I'm going to give you a really interesting option here, which is the Firewind Zidane, right? Cost 2 CP, and he's Firewind, so normally you have to pay 1 fire and 1 wind at least. Well, if you wanted to, if you only had Sherlotta out, you could dull Sherlotta to produce the wind CP, and then break her to produce the fire CP, and then bam, you've just paid for Zidane. So that's one of the ways that you could use her there. But that gets into how it works. So it says, does it use the stack? No, it doesn't use the stack. It's instant because paying costs is not something that uses the stack in general, and the only way to produce CP is when you're paying costs. The other question here is, could I cast another card named Sherlotta if I use the put into break zone CP as a cost? The answer here is no, and the reason why is because the way that we pay for things, or the way that we kind of, when we're casting a character, we reveal the character from our hand or from whatever zone it's in. We reveal the character, and then we pay the costs. But when we're revealing the character, you have to be revealing something that's legal for you to play on the field in the first place, legal for you to cast. So if you were to reveal another Sherlotta and try to cast it, it's illegal to play that Sherlotta because you currently control a Sherlotta and she doesn't have the multi-play icon there. So even though the result of like paying for her would make it so that you don't control a Sherlotta, and now it would be legal for that one to enter, the point at which it's checking the legality of whether you can cast something is when you're revealing it. It's before any costs are paid. So you wouldn't be able to do that. All right, next question. Hi there. I just wanted to confirm how these two cards interacted. If I used Setsuna's effect, putting 3 backups into the break zone, would I draw 3 cards off Garland? I believe I would, as Garland sees 3 backups entering the break zone at this point, but there was discussion about it being one event sending all 3. Therefore, Garland will only trigger once. First point of order here. Yeah, her name's pronounced Setsuna, by the way, because I think most of you have not played Type 0. So, surprise, her name's pronounced Setsuna. But anyway, getting into the card text here. So Garland, he has this ability, auto-ability, says when a backup's put from the field in the break zone, draw 1 card. And then she has an action ability that as part of it, it's you pay the cost is putting 3 backups into the break zone. So the question this person's asking is, when you pay that cost and put 3 backups in the break zone, how many times is Garland triggering? And this comes down to the wording of Garland's ability. Because his ability is worded just when a backup is put from the field in the break zone, that means that the trigger event in this case is just any time a single backup is put in the break zone. And because Setsuna's ability puts 3 of them in there, that means that it's going to trigger Garland 3 times. You're going to actually have 3 different Garland triggers that will then get put on the stack along with anything else that might have triggered from that. Now, I guess I should point this out, it's not part of the question, but those won't go onto the stack until after you finish paying the cost and putting Setsuna's ability on the stack, so it would be Setsuna's ability and then the 3 instances of Garland's above it. So the question here is, in what situation would it only trigger once? Is there a situation where it would only trigger once? And there is a wording that does get used in FFTCG that would only cause it to trigger once. And I'm going to give you an example here in a card that people have seen a lot, which is Cecil here. So his auto ability, the second one there, says when 1 or more characters you control are chosen, right? So the phrasing there, when 1 or more. So now the trigger event in this is not when a character is chosen or a character you control is chosen. The trigger event is when 1 or more. So if that Garland that we had before, if his auto ability was phrased as when 1 or more backups are put into the break zone from the field, if it was worded that way, then the fact that Setsuna is putting 3 in the break zone at the same time, that would only be 1 trigger event, and it would only trigger once. So that's the sort of wording you're looking for. If you're trying to figure out, wait, does this trigger multiple times, or does it trigger only once because the trigger event happened a bunch, but it was all part of one action? That's what you're looking for. You're looking for whether or not it says when 1 or more, or whether it's just when, So the or more is the key thing here. All right, now we've got Hashmal. I love this card, Hashmal. Does a forward that enters the field after Hashmal, Bringer of Order, has previously resolved still gain the element or job named? I.e., does all forwards you control become a floating effect for the rest of the turn, or does it only apply to the forwards that are in your control, under your control when Hashmal resolves? Hashmal, it's another one of these. I'm an FFTCG boomer, so it's a card that makes me smile when I see it. A lot of people maybe haven't seen it though. But it's got a pretty unique effect here because it does allow other forwards to gain elements or jobs, which is something that we just don't see that often in effects here. So if you're not familiar, the summon's pretty simple there. You just name one job or one element till the end of the turn. All the forwards you control gain 1k, and then also the whatever job or element that you named. So they're asking here, situation where you've got some forwards on the field, you cast Hashmal, you chose job Dancer, let's say, and then after that you cast another forward, play it to the field. Does that forward now gain Dancer as a job or no? And the answer here is no. They're not going to gain that, because these effects are checking what you control at the time that they resolve. That's why it's phrased as saying all forwards you control gain da 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 da. We see that the vast majority of the time with these effects. It's actually very rare to see something different there. So it's at the moment of resolution, it's going to do its thing to whatever you control, and then anything that happens after that point is not being affected by it. And then just as kind of a minor point here, since they use the phrase to become a floating effect, the official rules term for it is an ongoing effect. So Hashmal creates an ongoing effect that is giving 1000 power and the job or element to whatever forwards you have there. To give you an example of the rare case where something doesn't work that way, I'm going to give you a really obscure card you've probably never seen before, which is Paravir here from way back in Opus 5. And she's great just because she's a good example of the opposite here. But this is just how rare that we see this happen is that she's kind of the best option, and she's from 20 sets ago. So her ability says, when Paravir enters the field, all the forwards you control cannot be broken this turn. And you might be thinking, okay, well, it says the forwards you control. It's the same as Hashmal, right? That's the same wording there. What we have here is important words at the very end of it that say this turn. So it's defining that it's the forwards that you control this turn, not the forwards that you control at the time that it's resolving. And again, there's kind of some stuff that's like not written there. Like the other one doesn't say all the forwards you control when this resolves. They didn't phrase it that way, but that's the way that the rules work here, is that in the case of Paravir, when she enters, this is an ongoing effect that is not just affecting what was out there when she resolved. It's going to affect everything that you have this turn. So whether it entered before she did, after she did, this ongoing effect is all encompassing. And it's a powerful effect for that reason, which I think is why we see it so rarely. So yeah, if you're looking for something that is not going to affect just what's out when it resolves, you're looking for the phrase there, this turn. But again, you're not going to see it very much. Next question we have is about Abzu. It says, Abzu's ability states that during your turn, he also becomes a forward. Is it only treated as a forward while on the field, or is it treated as such while in the hand, field, deck, or break zone? And I think it was the last video I did of these rules roundups that we talked about kind of the different ways that monsters can become forwards, and whether it's a field ability or whether it's the result of an effect from an action ability. So this is one of those field abilities. You can see it's after his top ability. The second one says, during your turn, Abzu also becomes a forward, and so forth. So they're asking, well, hold on. If it's my turn, is he a forward when he's in my deck? Like if you had something that searched for a cost 3 forward in your deck, could you grab Abzu, right? Or if it was like, could you Lena it from the break zone to play it back onto the field? The answer here is no. It is only going to be a forward on your turn and when it's on the field. And it's because it's a field ability. And field abilities, for the most part, are only ever in effect when the card is actually on the field. There's some exceptions to this. I'm going to cover it really quick just because it's worth covering. The exceptions to this is that field abilities that are related to the cost, like an alternate cost to play something, they obviously need to be in effect before the card enters the field, otherwise they can't affect the cost in the first place. So if you have like Cecil or something, the Earth one, that can be cast with Earth and Water and taking a damage instead, that's a field ability, but it does impact things before he actually enters the field. So that is kind of the most frequent one of these things that you see, where it's a field ability that is in effect outside of just being on the field. But the vast majority of them, if it's not on the field, it doesn't count. Kind of a famous example of that is the Opus One Bartz. That's the one that says Bartz has all the jobs. He does have all the jobs, but only when he's on the field. When he's not on the field, he is very unemployed. Now, what kind of wording here, just like we did earlier with the Garland example, what kind of wording would make it so that Abzu was a forward, even if it wasn't on the field? This is the other exception we have for field abilities, is that there is a type of phrasing that gets used sometimes, which is, we're going to look at Zapped here, because he's a good example. His first field ability says, Zapped is also a monster in all situations. Here, the magic words are all situations. Just like with Paravir, the magic words were this turn. Well, here, it's in all situations. So what this is saying is that this field ability is making it so that Zapped in any zone, anywhere, counts as a monster. So it doesn't matter if he's in the remove from play zone, the break zone, your hand, your deck, your opponent's side of the field, doesn't matter. He's a monster in all situations. You also see some of those cards that will have the, like Jack Garland, that says Jack Garland is also a card named Garland in all situations. So yeah, those things are in effect everywhere and not just when it's on the field. Though I always kind of find it funny because it says in all situations, but if you were to like cast Kukulkan on Zapped, then it would not be a monster anymore. And so to me, it's just kind of like, maybe not all situations. How about most situations? Yeah, I guess in all situations where he still has his abilities. So yeah, the Abzu, not a forward if it's not on the field. All right, next question. Hi, I had a rules question. If someone tries to activate Ramza's action ability, could I use Cecil's first action ability to dull one of the active knights to cancel Ramza's action ability since they could no longer pay the cost? Ramza, seeing a lot of play right now. He's got that action ability to dull 4 active knights, choose a forward, break it, deal a point of damage. So the person asking this question, they're like, okay, well, what about Cecil here? A card you probably haven't seen so much of. And he's got that ability that says dull 2 active category 4 characters, choose 1 forward, and dull it. So they're like, well, what if I dull the knight before? Or like in response to them dulling the forward? Like, can that circumvent it so that now they don't have a way to pay? The answer is no. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. Unfortunately for the person asking the question. For the Knights player, it's very fortunate. But it doesn't work that way because you can't interrupt paying a cost. Like when you declare that you're using an action ability, you're going to declare that you're using it, pay the cost, it goes on the stack, and it's only after that point that your opponent even gets the chance to do something. And even then, if you hold priority, they don't get a chance right then, right? So it's going on the stack and then passing priority, and then they can do something to respond. So if you wanted to use Cecil's ability, dull a couple of 4 characters and then dull one of the knights, it's not effective for a couple of reasons. One is that the ability is already on the stack, so it doesn't really matter. It's already been paid for. And then the other one is that the knights are already dull, right? So now you're just trying to dull something that's already dull. So yeah, it's clever from the idea of like, oh, how can I get around, them just being able to dull the 4? But because of the mechanics of the game, you don't have the opportunity to do that. You would have had to do it beforehand. So like when they cast Ramza to the field, let's say that at that point they only have 2 knights, and it's before he's bringing out whatever from the break zone onto the field, Gorilla probably. So before they get to 4, you can respond at that point and dull some 4 characters to preemptively dull Ramza, because at that point there's not enough knights for him to use his ability. So you can do that, but if they're already at 4 by the time and they're using the ability, we're way too late. All right, more monster questions today. So it says, hey, so my buddy is playing a monster card with damage 3 text. Reddit has us all messed up. He's currently at damage 6. Will the ability only work when he has 3 points of damage, or does it work even if he's currently at 6? We're still learning monsters. Thank you. So here, his ability there, if you look down at the third line, it's got that damage 3. I don't think I've had any questions yet about damage things. But damage abilities are, the simple way of looking at it is that they're abilities that they only exist when you are at that threshold, right? So if you're at damage 2, then as far as the game's concerned, Tros only has 2 lines of game text. He stops after the first 2 lines there, and he doesn't even have that the remaining of his text. And then as soon as you get to damage 3, then poof, it's on. Now we have another ability there. But to answer the question, this is a pretty simple one. If you're at damage 4 or higher, then he still has the ability. It still has the ability. I don't want to assume Tros's gender, I guess. But yes, Tros still has the ability. Damage abilities are just giving you the you must be this tall to ride, right? So damage 3. You must be at least damage 3 to have this ability. If you're above it, great. You still have the ability. All right, Leviathan. If Opus 19 Leviathan bounces a primed Ifrit, does it stop my opponent from casting both Ifrit and Clive? This is a great question, to be honest. It's something that I think popped up right when priming was first announced. People trying to look at like all sorts of different effects and going, wait, how does that work with priming? How does that work with priming? So this effect says you return a forward to the opponent's hand, and until the end of the turn, your opponent cannot cast any copies of it. So to understand how this works with priming, you want to think about how does it work when priming is not involved, right? So let's say that you cast this on a copy of Realm, right? So you choose a Realm. It would be a pretty terrible thing to return to the opponent's hand, actually, but I'm going with it. Maybe it's not the 5 CP Realm. Maybe it's something like that that's not so bad to return to your opponent's hand, but it's just the first thing that came to my hand. To my hand? To my head. I swear I can talk today. First thing that came to my head. So you're returning Realm to the opponent's hand. And then it returns, effect resolves, and then until the end of the next turn, opponent can't cast any copies of Realm. How do we know what's a copy of that Realm? Right? Because maybe they're running more than one Realm. This situation's getting even weirder now. But they're running more than one version of Realm, right? So how do we determine copies? Well, we determine copies by the serial number at the bottom, just like how this one at the bottom is 19101R. So that's how we determine what the serial numbers are. So getting back to the primed version of this question, what is it that we can't cast if it's a primed Clive that's been returned to the hand? And so I'm going to do some selfless shame. Wow. Shameless self-promotion is what I was trying to say there. I'm going to do some shameless self-promotion here, which is that if you haven't, you should go watch my video on priming. Yeah, that one right there. Because I talk a lot about priming. I talk about just about everything, not specifically the Leviathan interaction, but other stuff that's related to it. And as part of that video, one of the things that I do is I give a mock-up of what the game text of Clive looks like after he primes into Ifrit. And it looks a little something like this right here. So we have Clive, but all of his text other than his original card name has been replaced with Ifrit. And that includes, if we look down here at the bottom, look at that serial number, 24-001L. That's his serial number after he's primed. And whose serial number is that? Ifrit's serial number. So to answer the question, if you cast Leviathan and you return Clive/Ifrit back to the hand, what is it that you're not allowed to cast until the end of the next or after the next turn? It's Ifrit. You're not allowed to cast him. You can cast Clive again. And then because of that, you can prime into Ifrit because Leviathan doesn't say that you can't prime into Ifrit. So that's a little bit messed up. Makes that Leviathan not nearly as effective as you might hope. But yeah, that's how that works, is that if it's primed forward and you return it with Leviathan, they can't cast the icon, but they can cast the dominant that was returned to your hand, or to their hand. All right, next question. A lot of words, so many words. If I play Zenos and break something, and that card is broken by another effect, do I still get the effect of the haste/discard? I know I don't get the break, because it's already placed in the break zone, but does the rest of the Zenos text function? It was put in the break zone, and it's not an if you do, so I'm curious if breaking your own thing in response to Zenos works to prevent him from getting haste/making them discard. My assumption is that Zenos probably doesn't get the effect, since it's all part of the effect, and it doesn't have a target on resolution, but I'm curious if it not saying if you do, but instead saying when it is placed makes a difference. I'm going to try to distill this down to really what the question's all about. The question here is Zenos has an effect. He's chosen a forward. And then before his effect resolves, that forward has been removed from the field for whatever reason. It could be because you did something. It could be because your opponent did something. It's removed from the field. So what happens to Zenos' effect? That's really what all of this gets distilled down to. And the fact there's in there is the fact they're asking about that his text says say when it is placed. So I know that Zenos is tiny because there's only so much room after all the text. So let's look at Zenos in blown up form. Bam! All right, he's big. So we're talking about the halfway down here, that auto ability. When Zenos enters the field, choose a forward of cost 3 or less, break it, and then when it is put from the field into the break zone this turn, select one of the two following actions, and then you got the choices there. So what they're asking about is that it does say when it is put from the field into the break zone this turn. So they're thinking, well, I chose it, and it went to the break zone. It just wasn't because of me. So do I get the effect? And this goes back to kind of the basics of how abilities and effects function here, which is that if you look just back at the beginning of this auto ability, when Zenos enters the field, choose one forward of cost 3 or less. We're just going to stop right there, right? Because that's all that happens until it resolves. What's happening here is that in this example that they're asking about, the forward that was chosen is gone when it goes to resolve. Because it's gone, then we just follow that rule that if an effect chose something, and when it goes to resolve, all the things that it chose are invalid, the effect self-cancels, right? So because of that, we don't have to worry about what the rest of this ability says, because it goes to resolve, and the only thing it chose is gone, so the whole ability self-cancels, right? It does have that when it is put from the field in the break zone, so it does create that like delayed auto ability there. But it's not going to be relevant here because the whole thing got self-canceled anyway. I guess like the niche situation where that would come into play is that let's say that like we use this ability, we chose something, and then before it resolved, they cast like Titan on that forward to make it so it can't be broken this turn. So then what would happen is this ability would go to break that forward. It wouldn't break it because it can't be broken, but the ability would still resolve the way that it's supposed to. So then it would still have that when it is put from the field in the break zone this turn. So then if later that turn, let's say you use Witch of the Fens or something to make it so it got to 0 power and was put into the break zone. Okay, well now we've met that trigger condition for the other bit, right? So that's kind of the roundabout way you would get to that, but it's not likely. In the scenario being asked, basically the whole thing's just going to self-cancel. All right, next question here. Lightning from one set ago at the point that I'm recording this. If I declare an attack, my opponent plays lightning from hand. Do I have time to break her before declaring the block to stop her effects? This lightning, if you're not familiar with her, she's got this action ability that's pretty neat, where you can play her from the break zone. From your hand, you get rid of other stuff in the break zone. You play her onto the field, but you're not casting her. So the action ability, you're able to use it during your opponent's turn. And ideally, the way that her abilities are structured, you're doing this during the attack phase to block something and then break it. So, remove it from the game. So they're asking like, okay, opponent used lightning, so like they declared an attack. Opponent used lightning, popped it down, and they're like, do I have a chance to break lightning before she declares a block? And the answer is yes. Yes, there is time to do that, because the way that the attack phase is structured, we have of course attack preparation, and then attack declaration, block declaration, damage resolution. So in attack declaration, you declared an attack, then there's that priority window that happens after that, and there's block declaration. Now, if they wait until after the block declaration step has started, it's too late to declare a blocker at that point. They can't like go into block declaration, then play her, then go, aha, I'm declaring a block, because that's too late. At that point, you've passed the part of the step where you would have declared a blocker. So they have to play her in the attack declaration priority that happens before block declaration happens. So because of that, the way this would likely play out is that you attacked with a forward, you passed priority, they went, okay, I'm playing lightning, played her to the field, and then after she enters the field, now priority goes back to you, the attacking player, and then now you have priority. It's before block declaration, before that step, so now you can use, I don't know, Ixion or something to just wipe her out, and then presuming nothing else happens, now you move to block declaration, now she's not there anymore. So just keep that in mind when somebody uses either back attack or an ability like this that plays something to the field. They do have to give you the opportunity to remove it before going to block declaration, because if they're trying to say you're in block declaration already, that means that they played the card too late for them to declare it as a blocker anyway. Same thing with monsters that turn into forwards, right? They have to use that ability to turn into a forward before the block declaration step, which means by definition you're in that priority before it, and you can't pass out of that priority until both players consecutively pass without doing something. So you have that opportunity to try to get rid of the monster. All right, now for our last question, we're going to be on theme here because, oh, look at that, lightning returned. She tends to do that. She returned. Different lightning this time. So this question, I have trouble understanding what this card does. So the first auto ability is pretty self-explanatory. Whenever a category 13 forward attacks, all forwards get 1,000 power, and I'm pretty sure it's cumulative. What I'm not understanding are the other two if abilities, which I presume are field abilities. When do they trigger? Are they cumulative? Why is there an if and not a when? All right, bunch of questions here. And this is another card that's, I would say it's probably worse than Sherlotta. We talked about Sherlotta being just a confusing card that they had to errata before it even was released to the public. This card has never been errated, but she's caused more confusion, I would say, just because of the way they phrased and put everything on her, and because of how wonky her text gets here. We're also going to blow up her card. So, poof. All right. Let's read through her just in case you're not familiar or in case it's been a little while. So she's got this auto ability. It says, when one or more category 13 forwards you control attack, all the forwards you control gain plus 1,000 power until the end of the turn. If 2 or more category 13 forwards were attacking this turn, also draw 1 card. If 3 or more category 13 forwards were attacking this turn, lightning also deals your opponent 1 point of damage. Believe it or not, everything below the haste there, everything I just read, that is all one auto ability. That whole 5 lines of text is one auto ability. So as a result, whenever the category 13 forward attacks, you're going to trigger this whole block of 5 lines here. Just as a quick aside, reminders, if you're trying to tell if 2 abilities are 2 different abilities, or if it's just one effect, usually the way that you can do that is by looking for a paragraph break. Some of them are super obvious, right? If the paragraph breaks towards the beginning and then you get a paragraph break, it's like, okay, yeah, that looks like 2 different abilities. Sometimes it's harder when the paragraph ends towards the end of a line here. And in this, you obviously see no obvious, wow, I just said obvious a lot of times. You see that there's no breaks there that are standing out. So I can see where, because if you look at the end of line 3, when it has the until the end of the turn, and then there's a period, and then at the beginning of the 4th line, we get the beginning of something new. I could see where people would look at that and go, oh, this is something different, right? That's separate from the 2 lines of the auto ability. But it's not. So when you got a 13 forward attacking, they're going to trigger this whole ability. Just like the Cecil we talked about earlier, notice that hers says when 1 or more category 13 forwards that you control attack. So if you do a party attack with multiple, you are not going to trigger her multiple times. You're going to trigger her once, okay? But the way we resolve her trigger every time is based off of the total number of forwards, 13 forwards specifically, that have attacked that turn, okay? So the kind of the ideal way, if you're the 13 player, that you want this to go is that you attack with 113 forward. Okay, you triggered lightning, everything gains 1000 power. Then you attack again with another 13 forward. You trigger lightning again, and the second time, they do get the 1000 power again. But then now we kick into the rest of this effect, which says if 2 or more category 13 forwards are attacking this turn, also draw 1 card. So the second time that you attack, then you're getting the 1000 power to everything, and then you're getting a card draw. And then, again, ideal circumstances, you attack with a third 13 forward, and a third time, triggering the whole block, we get 1000 power to everything, you draw a card, and then we get to that last bit of text that says, if 3 or more category 13 forwards were attacking this turn, lightning also deals your opponent 1 point of damage. So you get that as well. Okay? That's not only the ideal situation, it's also the easiest to understand, right? Attacked with 113 forward, I got this much. I attacked another 13 forward, I got to do the next bit. I attacked another one, I got to do the next bit as well. I got to all of it. Where things get complicated with her, or more complicated with her, is when you party attack, right? Let's say you party attack with 213 forwards, all right? You've triggered this only once, but now you're wondering what happens. I triggered it once, but what happens? So you triggered it once, it's on the stack, it resolves, and when it resolves, you get the 1000 power to everything. But then when it says, oh, if 2 or more category 13 forwards were attacking this turn, also draw 1 card. You've met that, right? You've got 2 that attack this turn. The other thing that makes this awkward, by the way, is the fact they use the phrasing of we're attacking this turn. So it's not if 2 or more attacked this turn. And they probably tried to avoid that because this is triggering while the attack is like still happening, right? They're still an attacking forward, so they probably didn't want it to be confusing in the sense of, oh, well, like, do they have to have finished attacking for this to count? So it's just awkward. But anyway, so you would get both of those parts of the effect off of just the first trigger because you party attacked with 2 there. Similarly, if you party attacked with 3, you would trigger this once, but you would get the 1000 power, you would get the card draw, and you would deal a point of damage. The last thing I'm going to say about this that's also kind of fun is it doesn't have to be different forwards. And you're like, what? And what I mean by that is, let's say, I'm not going to get into the mechanics behind all of it, but let's say you have, I think there's a knoll that can attack twice a turn, right? It doesn't see play, but there's a knoll that can attack twice a turn, right? So he attacks and triggers this once, you get the 1000 power. And then if he attacks again, that same turn, I could see somebody being like, well, hold on a second. That's not 2 or more forwards attacking this turn. It's 1 forward attacking twice. Well, in game terms, and this has been asked on Twitter, by the way, if you're doubting me, in game terms, they're not actually looking for unique 13 forwards attacking. They're just saying if there was an instance of a 13 forward attacking, how many times did that happen? So the same forward attacking twice, in this case, null, is still going to count as there being 2 forwards that were attacking this turn. It's weird, and it's one of those things that I am 110% confident that's how it works because it has been ruled on Twitter, but I can see with the way that it's worded, people being like, what? Or if you had a situation where you could somehow attack 3 times with the same 13 forward, then they could do all 3 of them. They'd end up by the 3rd time triggering all of this, even though it's the same 13 forward attacking 3 times. I think that covers just about every instance of what's confusing about Lightning and how she works. Let's really quickly check what the questions were again. So it was, I'm not understanding, are the other 2 if abilities, which I presume are field abilities. They're not field abilities. They are all part of the same auto, like I said. It says, when do they trigger? They trigger at the same time as the first auto ability because it's all one auto ability. So it all triggers at the same time. And then are they cumulative? They're cumulative in the sense that every time it triggers, it'll happen again. And then why is there an if and not a when? So the if there is because it's all part of the same effect. I mean, they could have, if they wanted to, they could have made it so it was one of these auto abilities that creates another auto ability and puts it on the stack. But they, for balance purposes or whatever, they decided not to do that here. So that's why it says if, is because this is all just affecting that first auto ability. So yeah, as per usual, I've ended this with like the really complex one, but yeah, that's the last question for today. Sorry for kind of losing my focus there a couple times today and having some difficulty getting the words in my brain out my mouth correctly. But I hope that was still enjoyable. I hope it was still educational for you guys there. Yeah, that's all I got for today. So thank you again so much for watching. Feel free to go check out any of the other rules roundups on the YouTube page here, or you can check out that priming video that I mentioned earlier. But yeah, if you haven't already, go ahead and do the whole like and subscribe thing, comment, tell me what you think. Tell me if you think that I go into too much detail in my answers here, or maybe if you think that you'd like me to go into further detail. I know some people have asked like, oh, could you link to sources and stuff for this, that's a lot of work to link to answers. It would be ideal if I could, but for the sake of time, it's not something that I'm doing right now. But if you want me to go into more or less detail on these answers, then just, let me know. It's just good to get the feedback and kind of see how I want to tailor things. Yeah, that'll do it for today. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Judge Jared, and until next time, court is adjourned.